There is a particular kind of heat that changes the way you think. I am standing in the desert, a very long way from anywhere, and the air itself seems to shimmer and lie. The sun is directly overhead, white and merciless, and the sand runs out in long, slow waves to a horizon that trembles as if it were made of water. There is no shade, there is almost no sound, only the faint hiss of moving sand, and the wind, and now and then, from somewhere out in the dunes, a low booming note, deep as a drum, that seems to come from the ground itself. That is the first thing you have to understand about the deserts. We imagine them as empty, blank, a great nothing, scoured clean by sun and wind, where nothing lives and nothing lasts. And it is very nearly the exact opposite of the truth. The desert is not where things vanish. The desert is where things are kept. Let me give you the scale of it, because it matters. Deserts cover something like a fifth of all the land on this planet. The greatest of them, the Sahara, is very nearly the size of the entire United States, an ocean of sand and rock and gravel wide enough to swallow whole nations without a trace. And these are not dead places. They are furnaces and freezers at once, roasting by day and bitter by night, so dry that in the driest of them it can go years, decades, without a single drop of rain. And that dryness is the secret, because the great enemy of preservation is water. Water is what lets things rot, and rust, and dissolve, and disappear. Take the water away, and you take away decay itself. A desert is a place where the clock of rot has almost stopped. Whatever the sand covers, it holds. A body, a city, a sea, held, more or less intact, in the dry and the dark, waiting. For 1,000 years, for 1,000,000, for longer. What follows are 7 things the desert has been keeping. 7 discoveries out of the sand, of the kind people like to call terrifying, and some of them have earned the word many times over. But I will make you the same promise I always make at the start. I will keep what is true separate from what is merely frightening, and where a story has run out ahead of the evidence, I will stop, and I will say so. That matters more in the desert than almost anywhere, because the empty places are where our imaginations most love to build the things we wish were real. We will count them down, from the 7th to the 1st, and as we go, we move further out into the sand, and further back in time, until at the very end we reach the largest secret of all, a whole hidden thing beneath the driest place on earth that has been waiting under our feet the entire time. Let us go in. Number 7. The door to hell. Out in the Karakum, one of the great deserts of Central Asia, in the country of Turkmenistan, there is a hole in the ground that has been on fire for more than half a century. It is not large, as these things go. A rough circle in the flat desert, some 70 meters across and around 20 deep. But from the moment you come over the last rise and see it, you understand why the people who live nearby call it the door to hell. Because the whole pit is burning. Hundreds of small flames flicker along its walls and floor, and at night it becomes a great glowing wound in the black desert, throwing orange light up into the dark, roaring softly, giving off a heat you can feel from the rim. The story of how it began is half history and half legend, and I will give you the honest version. The most widely told account is that, decades ago, back in the early 1970s, Soviet engineers were drilling here for gas. The ground beneath them collapsed, opening this crater and releasing a great gush of methane. Worried the poisonous gas would spread, they set it alight, expecting it to burn off in a few days. It did not. It has been burning ever since. More than 50 years of fire, fed by gas seeping up endlessly from below. For a long time it seemed it might burn forever, and that is how it entered the legend. But here is the honest and rather quieter ending that is unfolding right now. In the last few years, people who watch the crater closely have noticed the flames are dying down. Where once there was a single roaring inferno, now there are scattered smaller fires dramatically reduced. The authorities have said openly that they want it out, partly to stop the waste of gas, partly for the climate. The door to hell, after more than half a century, is slowly closing. I find something almost sad in that. It was never really a door to anything, of course. It was an accident, a mistake, a wound in the desert that we lit and could not put out. But for 50 years it burned in the emptiness, and people crossed deserts just to stand at its edge and feel the heat of it on their faces. The desert gave us fire that could not be quenched. It turns out even that was only borrowed. That was the desert on fire. The next one is the desert turned to poison and to stone. Number 6. The lake that turns creatures to stone. At the edge of the East African deserts, in the great rift where the land is slowly tearing itself apart, there lies a lake that looks, from above, like a wound. Its waters are stained deep red and orange, and along its shores, in the photographs that made it famous, lie the bodies of birds and bats, perfectly preserved, calcified, turned to something like stone, frozen mid-gesture as though death had caught them in an instant. This is Lake Natron, and it is one of the most hostile bodies of water on the face of the earth. It is what is called a soda lake. Water flows in, but nothing flows out, so it can only escape by evaporating in the fierce heat and over ages that has left the lake saturated with salts and natural soda, caustic and burning. The water can reach a temperature that would scald you, and it is so alkaline, so chemically harsh, that it can burn the skin and eyes of creatures not adapted to it. It looks, in every way, like a lake designed to kill. And here we come to the honesty I promised, because this is one of those stories that grew a great deal in the telling. You will hear it said that Lake Natron turns living animals to stone, that birds fly over it, are somehow petrified in the air and drop dead and hardened to its shores. That is not what happens. The lake does not reach up and freeze the living. What is true is stranger and quieter. Animals that die at the lake, for whatever ordinary reason, are preserved by its chemistry. The soda and salt dry them and coat them and hold them, so that instead of rotting away they are calcified, kept, turned into eerie grey statues of themselves. The famous haunting photographs of these creatures were made by a photographer who found the preserved bodies along the shore and carefully posed them, to show them as they had been in life. So it is not a lake that murders on sight. It is a lake that embalms. But do not let the correction rob it of its strangeness, because the truth is remarkable enough. Here is a lake so harsh that almost nothing can live in it, that takes the ordinary dead, and instead of letting the earth reclaim them, keeps them, hardened and perfect, on its poisoned shore. And here is the final twist that I love. That same murderous water is a nursery. Millions of flamingos, and almost only flamingos, gather to breed on this lake precisely because it is so deadly. Its very hostility keeps their predators away. Life, cradled in the middle of the one place nothing else can go. That was a sea in miniature, killing and keeping at its edge. The next one is a whole sea that has vanished entirely and left its monsters behind in the sand. Number 5. The Valley of the Whales. In the western desert of Egypt, a few hours from the Nile, there is a stretch of wind-carved sand and rock, silent and utterly dry, where you can walk among the bones of whales. Not near the sea. There is no sea here, and there has not been one for a very long time. This is some of the most arid land in the world, and yet lying in the sand, or half buried in it, or standing exposed where the wind has stripped the ground away, are the skeletons of enormous ancient whales, dozens of them, some of them more than 15 meters long, their great spines curving through the desert floor, their ribs and skulls scattered around them where they came to rest. The place is called, in Arabic, Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales. How do whales come to lie in the middle of a desert? The answer is one of the most profound things the sand has ever given up. Around 40 million years ago, this whole region was not desert at all. It was the bottom of a warm, shallow sea, an arm of an ancient ocean that once covered this part of the world. And in that sea swam these whales. When they died, they sank into the mud of the sea floor and were buried and kept. Then, across millions of years, the sea withdrew, the land rose, and the wind and sun went to work, until at last the old seabed became open desert, and the bones of its creatures were laid bare under the sky. But there is something more here, and it is the reason this place is treasured by science above almost any other. These are not quite whales as we know them. Look closely at the skeletons and you find, at the base of those huge bodies, small, delicate hind legs. Little feet, whales with legs. Because these creatures are caught in the very act of one of the great transformations in the history of life. Their ancestors had once walked on land, and they were in the slow process of returning to the sea, their legs shrinking away over the ages toward the flippers and tails of the whales we know today. The desert has preserved, in stone, a photograph of an animal halfway between two worlds. Sit with that for a moment. A bone-dry valley where nothing lives, that once rang with the sound of whales. A desert floor that is really an ancient seafloor, holding the skeletons of creatures with legs. Caught forever in the middle of becoming something else. The sand did not just bury a sea, it kept the sea's secret, for 40 million years, until we came along dry-footed to read it. That was the deep past kept in bone. The next one is the deep past kept alive. Number 4. The things that woke up. Beneath a desert mountain in northern Mexico, there is a cave that should not exist. And inside it, scientists found something asleep that they say they were able to wake. The cave lies deep underground, in the heart of a mine in the Chihuahuan Desert, and it is one of the most staggering natural sights on this planet. It is a chamber filled, wall to wall and floor to ceiling, with crystals. Not small ones. Colossal beams of glassy, translucent crystal, some of them as long as a bus and thick as a tree trunk, crossing the cavern at every angle like the frozen bones of some enormous beast. It is beautiful, and it is almost lethal to enter. Down there, the air is close to 50 degrees, near saturated with moisture, so hot and so humid that an unprotected human body can only survive a few minutes before it begins to fail. The crystals grew, over hundreds of thousands of years, in mineral-rich water that once filled the cave. And when scientists studied them closely, they found that as each crystal grew, it had trapped tiny pockets of that ancient water inside itself, sealed bubbles. And inside those sealed bubbles, they found life. Microbes, tiny organisms shut away inside the solid crystal, cut off from the world, for a very, very long time. Now here is where I must be careful and honest, because this is exactly the kind of story that gets stretched into something it is not. The scientist who led the work, a researcher from the world of astrobiology, the study of possible life beyond Earth, reported that these trapped microbes were not merely present, but could be revived, coaxed back into life in the laboratory after an estimated 10,000 to 50,000 years sealed inside the crystal. If that is right, it is astonishing. It means life that was dormant since before the end of the last ice age, brought back, still viable, from inside a stone. But I promised you honesty, so here it is. This result was announced at a scientific meeting, and, as far as the careful public record goes, it was never fully published and checked in the usual way. Other scientists raised an obvious and reasonable worry, the same worry that haunts all such claims. Contamination. In a working mine, with people coming and going, how do you prove the life you found had truly been sealed in the crystal for 50,000 years and had not simply crept in more recently? The honest answer is that it is genuinely hard to be sure, and so this remains a remarkable claim rather than a settled fact. I still find it extraordinary, even held at arm's length. Whether or not those particular microbes truly woke, we know beyond doubt that the desert underground is full of these sealed chambers, and that life clings on in places we once thought impossible. In boiling water, in solid crystal, in total dark. The desert does not only keep the dead. Down in the hot and the dark, it may just be keeping some things alive. That was life perhaps brought back. The next one is us, our own dead, kept by the sand. Number 3. The oldest dead in the world. Along the coast where one of the driest deserts on Earth meets the sea, there once lived a people who did something no one else in the world had thought to do. They refused to let their dead simply disappear. We call them the Chinchorro, after the beach where their traces were first found, in the great Atacama Desert of South America. And what they left behind are mummies, human bodies, deliberately and carefully preserved, prepared with enormous love and skill. The people who made them took their dead apart and rebuilt them, reinforcing the bones, remaking the bodies with clay and sticks and reeds, covering them in paste, giving them faces and masks, sometimes wigs of human hair. They mummified everyone, not just the great and powerful, but ordinary people, the old and the young, and most touchingly of all, their babies and even their unborn children. It was, it seems, an act of grief and devotion, repeated over thousands of years. And here is the fact that stops people in their tracks. These are the oldest deliberately made mummies anywhere on Earth. The Chinchorro were preserving their dead this way around 7,000 years ago. That is more than 2,000 years before the ancient Egyptians made their first mummy. When we picture the origin of mummies, we picture the pharaohs, the pyramids, the golden masks, but this quiet fishing people, at the far edge of the world, on the shore of a desert, were doing it 2 millennia before Egypt began. They could do it in part because of where they lived. The Atacama is so staggeringly dry that bodies left in it can be naturally preserved on their own, dried and kept by the desert air. It is very likely the Chinchorro learned the idea from their own desert, from finding their long dead so perfectly kept in the sand, and then set out to do deliberately, with art and ritual, what the dry land had shown them was possible. So when you stand before a chinchorro mummy, you are looking into a face that is 7,000 years old. A real person, a fisherman, a mother, a child, from a time before writing, before the wheel, before almost every civilization we have names for. Held, all this time, by the driest desert in the world, and by the hands of people who could not bear to let them go. Of all the things the sand keeps, I am not sure any moves me more than that. That was the desert keeping our dead. The next one is the desert keeping a secret about itself, and it is the one people most want to get wrong. Number 2. The world that was here before. There is a place in the Sahara, in the country of Mauritania, that from high above looks exactly like something built. A vast set of rings, one inside the next, a great bullseye stamped into the desert, some 40 kilometers across, so huge and so regular that the astronauts who first saw it from orbit used it as a landmark. People call it the Eye of the Sahara, and because it looks designed, the stories came. That it is the ruin of some vast lost structure. That it is, in fact, the true site of Atlantis, the fabled sunken city, its concentric rings matching the old descriptions, waiting here in the sand for someone to recognize it. You will find this claim told with great confidence all over the internet. I have to be plain with you, as I always am. The Eye of the Sahara is not Atlantis, and it is not built. It is a work of pure geology. It is a great dome of rock, pushed up from below over a very long time, and then slowly worn down flat by erosion, so that we now see it sliced open from above, ring after ring of harder and softer rock, exposed like the layers of an onion. It is genuinely wonderful to look at, but no one made it, and no city ever stood there. There is no evidence, none at all, of a lost civilization in those rings. But here, exactly as with so many desert myths, the honest truth is more astonishing than the fantasy, because there was a lost world here, not a city, a living land. As recently as 6,000 years ago, and for long stretches before that, the Sahara was not desert at all. It was green, a vast savanna of grass and trees, threaded with rivers, dotted with great lakes, roamed by elephants and giraffes and hippopotamuses. And it was full of people, who lived along those rivers and hunted those animals and left behind, on the rock walls of the desert, thousands of paintings of the world they knew. Paintings of cattle, paintings of swimmers, in a place where today there is not a drop of water for hundreds of miles. And then, in what may have been the span of only a few centuries, astonishingly fast as these things go, the rains failed, the green died back, the lakes dried, and the sand came in and took it all. The people scattered, many of them, it is thought, toward a certain great river valley to the east, where they would help seed one of the first civilizations of the world. The desert did not just cover a green land, it erased it so completely that, thousands of years later, we look at the same ground and cannot imagine it was ever anything but sand, and we have to be argued, with evidence, back into believing in the rivers. So you do not need Atlantis, you never did. The real lost world of the Sahara is not a marble city under the dunes. It is the memory of grass and water and the people who painted the animals they lived beside, all of it swallowed so thoroughly that we forgot it had been there at all. And that green world left something behind, deep down, which is where we end. Number 1. The ocean under the sand. Everything we have talked about so far has been on the surface, or just beneath it. The burning pit, the poisoned lake, the bones in the valley, the crystal cave, the mummies in the dust, the rings of stone. But the greatest secret of the desert is not on the surface at all. It is far below it, and it is vast almost beyond belief. Beneath the eastern Sahara, under some of the driest and most lifeless sand on the entire planet, there is water, not a trickle, not a hidden spring, an ocean of it, sprawling underground for hundreds of kilometers beneath the sands of Egypt and Libya and Sudan and Chad. There lies one of the largest stores of fresh water on Earth, held in the rock-like water in a sponge. It is one of the great hidden reserves of the planet, sitting silent and unseen under the last place on Earth you would ever think to look for water. And the most haunting part is where that water came from. It is what scientists call fossil water. It did not seep down recently. It is old. It fell as rain and ran as rivers, tens of thousands of years ago and more, back in those green ages when the Sahara was alive, when the rain came and the lakes filled and the land was covered in grass. That water sank down into the rock and was sealed there. And when the green world died and the desert rolled in above it, the water stayed. It has been down there in the dark, this ancient rainfall of a vanished green Africa, waiting under the dunes ever since. When people in the desert today drill down and drink, they are quite literally drinking rain that fell on a savanna before our history began. And the water is not the only ghost of that lost world buried down there. Using radar that can see through the sand from space and from the air, we have begun to map what lies beneath the dunes, and we have found the desert's hidden past written into the very ground. Great riverbeds, whole networks of ancient channels, some of them enormous, the beds of mighty rivers that once ran across a green Sahara toward the sea, now buried, bone dry, invisible from the surface, and traceable only by looking through the sand from above. There are rivers under the desert that no living thing has seen flow, whose valleys are packed solid with the very sand that killed them. Do you see what has happened by the time we reach the bottom of this list? We started, one entry ago, with people insisting there was a lost world hidden under the Sahara, a drowned city, a secret civilization, sealed and forgotten beneath the sand. And they were right about one thing and wrong about everything else. There is a lost world under the desert. It is real, and it is immense, and it has been kept in the dark for tens of thousands of years. It was simply never a city. It is the desert's own green childhood, buried beneath its old age, an ocean of ancient rain, and the ghosts of great rivers, held in the rock beneath the driest place on earth, keeping the memory of the time before the sand. That, in the end, is what these seven share. A pit of fire that burned for 50 years in the emptiness, a poisoned lake that embalms the dead on its shore, a valley of whales that was once the floor of a sea, a crystal cave that may have kept life asleep for 50,000 years, the oldest mummies in the world, in the driest sand in the world, a myth of a lost city, hiding a truth about a lost green land, and, beneath all of it, an ocean of ancient water and the beds of vanished rivers, the buried memory of a Sahara that was once alive. I keep coming back to the same thought, standing out here in the heat. We tend to picture the desert as the great eraser, the place things go to be scoured away and forgotten. It is the opposite. The desert is one of the finest keepers of secrets on the planet, precisely because it is so dry that nothing here is allowed to rot, or fade, or wash away. It only waits. It kept a sea, and its whales. It kept our oldest dead, with their faces intact. It kept an entire green world, and hid it so well beneath the sand that we forgot it had ever been green at all. The desert around me is quiet now, gold and endless under a falling sun, giving nothing away. I have learned by now not to mistake that stillness for emptiness. Here, as much as anywhere I have ever stood, the surface is only a lid. Everything that matters is underneath it, kept in the dry and the dark, patient beyond our understanding, and in no hurry at all to be found. There is one last thought I will leave you with. Everything we have looked at, the ice and the deep sea before it, and now the sand, has been a place we call empty and dead, and every one of them has turned out to be full. It makes me wonder about all the other blank spaces on the map, and the blank spaces we carry in our heads. How many of them, if we only knew how to look, would turn out to be keeping something too? For now, the desert is quiet, the light is turning to gold, and somewhere far beneath my feet, deep under the driest sand on earth, an ocean of ancient rain lies in the dark, remembering a green world, and waiting. Thank you for coming out into the desert with me. If you want to keep uncovering what the emptiest places on earth are still hiding, subscribe to the channel.